Isabella, how you going?
Pretty good, pretty good. How about yourself?
Yeah, fantastic. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your
Yeah,
time. And yeah, just wanted to say I've really been enjoying the content that you've been putting out through Hyperallergic on Instagram and stuff. It's just wonderful.
thanks so much.
It's of course it's really like it's kind of like a news channel, but just for art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I wish that the art news was not kind of kept at the bottom of most newspapers. But being able to work at a newspaper that is just art is super fun.
Yeah, totally. Can you tell us just a little bit about what hyperallergic is and your kind of role and what you do there?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So Hyperallergic is an independent art news organization. They're coming up, or we're coming up in our 15th year, is held to all the same journalistic standards as any other newspaper would be. What we are allowed to do is be independent. So we're not kind of beholden to a much larger organization or a private company that owns us. So, which basically allows us to, I think, to kind of say a lot of things that you're not necessarily encouraged to say in other newspapers, other publications. So a few years ago, I started making Instagram videos for them and TikTok videos for them. I started writing for them a little bit. And as of recently, I just joined as a part of the staff to do podcasting, editing the podcasts that we're starting to put out again, and some more social media things. But yeah, that's basically what I do with them. My biggest project I'm working on right now, I just joined more full time a few weeks ago, is the podcast.
Yeah,
But
right.
which is super fun. Yeah, all of it's super
I
fun. I keep saying
only
it's super fun. It really is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great. I only just got wind of that actually, so I've just
yeah.
subscribed to the podcast and have yet to listen.
Yay.
But I'm very keen. But yeah, I really do feel like it's a really kind of a needed resource and one that I didn't really know that I needed until I started really watching your videos. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is great to stay informed in the art world and I don't know, just yeah, I feel that your takes are very interesting and informative. And yeah, on you know many of the different kind of subjects you which I'm sure we'll get into. There's
Yeah.
so many things that you bring up that I yeah, find fascinating. But
Awesome.
I've also just having watched your videos and then just kind of seeing a bit more what you're about. I've come to see that you're writing a book, and I've found the subject for your upcoming book
Yeah.
very interesting, especially because it's very much a subject that has been revolving around a lot of my wife's research, who is an artist
Oh,
who,
cool.
but
Oh,
basically
cool.
it's about the ornament in architecture. And you've even made a video of how the diminishment of ornament in architecture is linked to white supremacy and even fascism.
Mm.
I was wondering if you could give us yeah, it really is fascinating. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an overview of the subject and
Yeah.
your research.
Yeah, of course. Well, I started, so actually, I think when I was not just, I promise it won't be a long answer. When I was 12 years old, my my godfather gave me this book called Spelt's Styles of Ornament, which is actually on the mantle over there.
Yep.
Um, and is I just was totally enraptured. This guy kind of just went in his mind all around the world and copied down with pen and ink these ornamental design, mostly on architecture, but also on like, kind of applied arts. And I became absolutely obsessed with it. And then became an ornamental artist myself. Um, and in I minored in visual studies. And so during that time, and a lot of my professors I'm thankful for in many ways, but also we were really kind of focused a lot on racism in visual imagery and how that works how that works to enforce white supremacy, especially in America. And so I ended up trying to research this thing called ornament. And the first thing you come up with across, if you research ornament, especially in contemporary architecture, is this guy Adolf Loos. And Adolf Loos was this architect in turn of the century Vienna. Not a very good architect, not very, very celebrated, before he did this thing, which is that he wrote an essay and also gave it as a talk called Ornament and Crime. That was around 1908, published as an essay in 1911. And it completely caught fire, and it's still referenced in so many architecture schools today. It's still read in these architecture schools today. And it's basically a racist, misogynistic diatribe that is basically encouraging people to shed any ornaments at all that they might want to wear or decorate, shed all of the ornamentation from their clothing, from their buildings and their interior, not as much the interior design, but also mainly the interior design, so that they can be viewed as civilized human beings. And if you were not, if you still covered yourself with ornaments, you must be a criminal or a degenerate or a somebody of what he would consider a lesser race. So when the group he focuses on the most are indigenous people from Papua New Guinea, because they cover themselves with ornaments. They are not as civilized, and they are literally not as evolved, like genetically, they are not as much human beings as we are as Western men, because we do not ornament ourselves. And I was just blown away that this was a thing, that this guy wrote in this essay that had such an enormous impact across the field of architecture. And I started asking around people who are studying architecture, and to this day, I still talk to people about how this is taught in classes as a fundamental paper in architecture. And only sometimes is it really questioned. And maybe it's like, oh yeah, this obviously is racist language, but we don't break apart why it is racist or how it is racist. And so there's just this large, there's this, what I think is, so what I'm trying to do is talk about ornament and architecture in the history of ornament and architecture in a critical way, but also bring together examples of ornament from around the world that is beautiful. Ornaments on buildings, but also ornaments in clothing, in textiles, and many different things. But basically, this is what I'm hoping is that this will serve as a precedent for architects today, to reference and get inspired for their buildings, because there isn't really a good kind of overview of architecture and ornament today, but also an overview of architecture and ornament from around the world, from world history. I'm especially trying to focus as much as I can on folk ornament, because that is what is the most overlooked. We have lots of discussions about neoclassical architecture, about Gothic architecture, and the ornament that happens there. But folk architecture from places like Burkina Faso, very, very, very much overlooked, and is not considered, as advanced architecture as I believe it should be. It's on this being on the same level as any other architects today. So so that's like a very long answer, but it's like my life's it's like everything I do all day. So I know I need to be a little more concise on it. But yeah,
great.
I hope that was, so I've been, so basically, what this led to is that I posted a video in 2020 about this. And it kind of blew up in a lot of good ways, but also like got a lot of people really, really riled up. Including PewDiePie, like the YouTuber, called me quote unquote a stupid fucking bitch because I had said this. Like, people get really, really upset when I start talking about this, if they are just really in that mindset. And so I've been especially interested also since then on why this topic kind of gets people so riled up, and also in a good way. People get excited or angry, because of course it's not just Adolf Loos, it's Le Corbusier, it's Philip Johnson, it's Mies van der Rohe, it's so many architects that are that are more influenced by what I see as is pretty plainly white supremacy, anti-fascist, excuse me, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and in some cases fascism. So that's just something that's really underexplored, and I'm just really, really hoping to get the conversation started, even if it's a little bit rough along the way. That we
Yeah.
hope that these conversations begin to be more robust.
I feel like the name Adolf is a bit of a red flag that people could
Oh
detect in
yeah.
architecture school, but
Oh yeah. No, you should. You should be wary of Adolfs. And not for nothing, I have like a great uncle Adolf who was pretty right wing.
really.
So, and yeah, and I comfort myself for no reason that we weren't like related by blood, but he was like a Nazi sympathizer.
Oh wow.
And so
Okay.
I don't know why that comforts me, but he's like because it's all the same, we're all family. But yeah, it's fucked up. And his name was Adolf. And I was like,
Mhm.
well, if it's gonna be the Adolf in the family, it's gonna be him.
Yeah.
Anyway. Uh,
And another thing you were talking, you mentioned in one of your videos about Adolf Loos, sorry. Yeah, and you were mentioning it. Was it the Papua New Guinea people who was particularly critical of
yeah,
their ornamentation? Was
yeah.
there
Hmm.
a lot of their, use of and inverted commas for listeners, primitive tattoos? So there's a lot of facial tattoos, neck tattoos, very
Yeah,
visible tattoos, and it
yeah,
was a real kind of he was really framing the tattoo work as I don't know, very, very bad, very primitive, very yeah, like you say, unevolved.
yeah,
And another method that he really believed in, which was seemed to be very much imposed by a lot of colonialists, was the suiting, putting a lot of
yes,
you know Aboriginal people, yeah, native people from various countries, making them wear suits, making them
yeah,
um, not wear their ornamented clothes and things, and look civilized. And that was a very much kind of universal, which kind of is very similar to the push towards minimalism in
mm,
architecture.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, do you? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. Some of the photos that you posted, yeah, it's pretty rough seeing that, isn't it?
yeah,
It's pretty horrible. I don't
yeah,
know. Just assuming that everything that you don't understand is wrong, and just trying
yeah,
to make everything exactly how your way is. I mean, yeah, it's a big conversation.
yeah.
But what do you think it was about the like minimalism? Where did kind of minimalism begin, and what about minimalism is so I'm just trying to figure out how to word this question.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Yeah, what is it about minimalism particularly that you think really, I guess what we just said, relates to white supremacy, kind of exactly that.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. So, I mean, like, so one thing I'll always my caveat is always, or what I like to, you know, I definitely want to underline that I don't think that minimalism itself is going to be inherently white supremacist on its own or
mm,
inherently fascist at all. I think minimalism can be done in a really beautiful way, in a really respectful way. It's entirely possible, and there are many beautiful examples around the world. Um, from architects and artists who wouldn't believe in minimalism and
mm.
fascism.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's why my
and then
question was so clunky, because I do
yeah,
actually
oh yeah,
really
no,
like
no, no,
minimalism. Yeah,
of
like
course, yeah,
mm,
yeah. So that's just my preface for it. But what I do think is under but yeah, as mentioned, I do think it is under examined. There are some elements for a lot of this architecture, especially that are very under examined and need to be looked at closer. Minimalism, the beginning of minimalism, I would say the beginning of Western minimalism, I would say, oh, sorry, that was probably could hear that. So I believe that so let me try that sentence one more time. Sorry. Um, I think that you could put the beginning of Western minimalist architecture, or at least the roots of it, probably around the Reformation, like the Protestant Reformation, which is when you start seeing this wave of people that are converting into Protestantism, going away from Catholicism, that see a lot of inequality and just hypocrisy happening in the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was always really, really good at kind of illustrating its authority or solidifying its authority by creating ornamental structures and ornamental pieces of art. And ritual objects, et cetera, using gold and kind of stating their power in that way. And many, many, many systems of authority, the British Crown, so many people have, and continue to this day even, you know, emphasize their authority through ornament as well. So what happened was, with the Protestant Reformation, of course, you saw iconoclasm. So all of these people who are taking out all of their anger on the church, and you have people like Martin Luther saying that churches should not be this ornamented. There should not be images like this. And so it's out of this movement that you see the beginning of really whitewashed churches and kind of churches murals just being wiped over or whitewashed in general. And to this day, there's this pretty big divide between Protestant churches and Catholic churches, or Catholic iconography and Orthodox iconography because of that. But what happens is that, you know, that sort of, there's a kind of a lull for a little bit, but it is in really the late 1800s that this starts to come back, or people start to associate ornament with kind of decadence and unequal, you know, like a little bit injustice, like, you know, some unequal wealth is happening. But also just they kind of take out some of their anger at ornaments eventually for things that maybe is not ornament's fault in a certain way. But you start to see, like in Art Nouveau, like probably like in a lot in Secession architecture in Vienna, you start to see kind of the seeds of it in a really, really interesting way, where there are these big spaces that are starting to be left in pages and buildings that would otherwise be covered, usually be covered in ornament. So you start to see the seeds of it there, but then it is modernism eventually that really allows us to go full into minimalist architecture. Because modernism is this era where people are just totally thinking outside the box in every which way. You know, things are getting totally mixed up. It is the time where we get so many ideas that led to where we are now in the 21st century, especially culturally, because, you know, thinking about especially like Weimar Republic, Germany, it's like people are just experimenting, trying all types of anything kind of goes. And so that's where you start to see the Bauhaus school be really, really, really streamlined architecture, no frills, no ornaments at all. You know, the international style kind of comes after that. And then we are where we are now, which is the kind of the era where the international style is still kind of continuing. And we have some new types of kind of neoliberal inflected skyscrapers in a certain way. So, you know, throughout all this time, the people at the helm are mainly white men who are extremely, extremely wealthy. Those are the people who are making the decisions of what this aesthetic looks like. It is their preference. And that's to this day, the statistics, and, you know, I only know, well, you know, American statistics, but it is one of still the most racially divided, or maybe I think just one of the least diverse fields that you can go to, especially within art. You have, at this point still, only 2% of registered architects, or of architects that have licensed architects in the US, are Black. And only 0.25% of licensed architects in the US are Black women. It is way not diverse enough at all. And so it's, you know, this is a part of the way that white supremacy gets entrenched and then also hasn't been challenged, I think, in a lot of ways. And then one of the biggest problems is that, and one of the biggest reasons why it's not extremely more diverse than it is that it just costs so much money to become an architect. There is no other way around it. You have to work for incredibly low wages or no wages at all for a very long time in order to get to the point where you can be a full architect. And even then, architects are not paid very much unless they're at extremely high levels. So to get there, you have to have like a very large, cash reserve to make up for all of that time. And so you end up with this statistic I don't have in front of me, but it's something along the lines of like 90% of architects come from upper class families. This is not, there's a lot of inequality there. And that comes through with the buildings, as well as the clients. It's also what the clients want. It's doing anything for the clients. So if you get the biggest, baddest, richest client, they're going to make a pretty, that's the building that they make. Anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but again, I'm sorry, but there's so much. There's so much more. I mean, but I'll leave it at there. Leave it there for now.
It was interesting hearing what you're saying about the kind of the church and ornament used as like such a sign of decadence and things. But because towards the end of last year, I was able to go over to Europe and go to some of some of the most beautiful cities in Italy. So, for instance, I went to Florence again and got to see. Have you been to Florence?
I have.
Yeah,
It was amazing.
I mean, the
I was really
cathedral
into
there,
it.
the dome with the
Yeah.
cathedral. It's like
Oh, it's so good.
it really was just jaw-dropping. Like the amount of detail. It's almost psychedelic. It's just so much detail on detail on detail. Everything's marble, and even just the doors. There's stories of sculptures, and I mean I mean, a subject that me and my wife were talking about just constantly was like, what happened? Like what, I mean, obviously the church is a massive power structure and big signs of wealth and opulence and stuff. But I mean, going through Europe and just seeing so much old architecture and there has been such a change. There has been a massive, even I suppose capitalism would have a big role to play in the cheapening of materials. But I mean, there's just, to be honest, there's not a whole lot of modern architecture except for the really, expensive, over the top stuff. The big museums, like I think, are incredible, but there's not a whole lot of modern architecture that you see in the day-to-day street that I love. I think old buildings with modern interiors is my favorite. But it is it almost feels like a diminishment of the spiritual kind of in a sense. The lack of detail, the lack of care, of storytelling, of symbolic imagery does seem like a diminishment of the spiritual in everyday life. I was curious as to whether those are driven by trends or driven by ideologies, how does that all evolve? Do you have any thoughts on that idea of the diminishment of the spiritual in modern art?
Very much so.
Oh yeah.
Oh, definitely, man. The first thing I think of is, so I'm Jewish, and one of my favorite things to study is Jewish art history. And I think there is something very tragic that's happened in Jewish architecture, especially, I think, which is that Jewish architecture and ritual objects, this goes for all around the world, are historically very ornamented. And, there's many religions that is the case for, but this is just, it is something that is the one that I know the best. But it was really important to us. Because that ornamentation is not just, for some very, very wealthy people that would have been, it's a sign of, oh, I have this super amazing, Book of Esther or whatever. But for a lot of people, this was also true of not very wealthy Jews, of people living in the shtetls. So one of my favorite types of architecture, group of buildings, were the wooden synagogue, wooden shtetl synagogues. excuse me, wooden shtetl. I'm going to do it again. Wooden shtetl synagogues. There you go. And so because they're first of all, they're like these very beautifully ornamented just in the architecture, but the insides were just covered in brightly colored, like ornamental, extremely detailed, and just totally wacky murals of things like unicorns and like zodiac signs and of course all different types of Jewish symbols, but you know, images of cities, and then prayers, you know, written on the walls. People can remember the prayers, and just they're just so freaking gorgeous. And it also, all of those things had spiritual significance. All of those symbols had spiritual significance. Um, you know, there, and so the pomegranates, that means something, the fish, that means something, deer, like there's just so many symbols that have ancient pieces of knowledge with them. And what ends up happening for a lot of people is, you know, a lot of Ashkenazi Jews come to the US. Some, you know, many of us are now seen as white and treated as white. And for some of us, you know, there are people that become wealthier, of course, and then there are people who become architects, and there's people. And so what happens is that to gain acceptance into white society, you have to look the part and you have to play the role. And so what we end up seeing is, to now, you know, synagogues built in the US that are new today are generally very minimal. They're not covered with those murals. The only time you see ornament and color is in stained glass. And so that's, it's kind of, it's beautiful, but it's limited to that. And often that's not even there. So, and it's this really, I think they can be beautiful structures. Some of them are freaking gorgeous. And there's even some that are, yeah, there are a lot of really, really beautiful structures. But what I think is lost is that there is all this spirituality that is hidden in the ornaments. There are all of these, there's all this ancient knowledge that we're not tapping into. And there's also, I think, you know, it's a sad thing for a lot of people that, you know, grow up in the US and are, you know, grow up in American white culture, and where we're, you know, raised to believe that we don't have a culture other than what we see in front of us. And even within the Jewish community, I see so many people don't know that we have this incredibly colorful, for Ashkenazi Jews, the only images we get to see of our history are from the Holocaust or from other horrible things that have happened to us. We very rarely see these images of joy and beauty and ornament that filled a lot of our daily lives. And so this is also one of the things that I love talking about and studying and stuff, because I think, you know, immediately we have this association with ornament and wealth. It is always that, you know, ornament, we don't have much ornament today because it's really, really costly. And there's a role there. There's a whole conversation to have there about capital and labor and craftsmanship and all of these things, or craftspersonship, and all these things. But there's also the reality that ornament doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be something that, you know, or just go, you know, you're, a lot of people's lives are filled with ornament who are not super wealthy. And there's ways of making ornament without spending money. One of my favorite Jewish art traditions is Jewish paper cutting, which
I was
is
thinking
just
doilies as well.
Oh my gosh,
Like,
I love
when you were saying
doilies. I love,
that,
yes.
just an inexpensive, beautiful,
An inexpensive, absolutely beautiful thing. And so paper cutting, you know, it's a lot like that. Jewish paper cutting, we don't know when it's really hard to track the history of it, because the paper cuts have dissolved, most of them have dissolved. So there's just these very, very few kind of precious paper cuts that we have. I mean, there's like thousands of them, but like only in the thousands. When it's something that there used to be millions and millions and millions of them. but, or I don't know, millions and millions and millions. I'm not sure how many. We don't know. That's a part of it. But the thing about paper cutting is all you need is paper. And that is one thing that a lot of these like small, very poor Jewish towns would have, is a lot of paper, because everybody was reading and writing. And but it's paper and a knife, and you can create a paper cut. You don't need gold and silver or very, very special skills. Although when you progress, it gets to the level where it's like, I don't know how anybody can do that. And to be clear, paper cutting is also found on, like, if they're crazy. I mean, they're so detailed. Like these tiny things. People, they're cutting like Hebrew words, like all this stuff. It's insane. It's so cool. And so that's just objectively, generally, my favorite type of art is stuff that's just made in your house with like seeds and stuff like that, that people have done, that so often gets overlooked.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you said before about how much kind of ancient knowledge that we are missing out on. Another incredible place that I visited in Europe was Alhambra in Spain, in Seville, I think it's in Seville. Yep, and it's some of the old Islamic architecture is just next level. The mathematics that they put into these mandalas, tile works, just so over the top, but so, I don't know. I obviously I'm not I'm not Muslim, but I've felt that looking at some of these architectural feats, particularly of interiors. I mean, lots of photos that I've seen online of mosques in Iran. I think they're mosques, so they're not. But I really do get this feeling of the divine. It does resonate with this feeling of divine in a very different way to like the Christians have done it, for example. It's this it's this universal there's so much geometry in there, and there is a lot of mathematics and a lot of knowledge that has gone into that. And I mean, it must change the way modern people think by not being surrounded by constant ancient knowledge, exactly as you said. We are washed of that ancient knowledge. Things are much more churn and burn now. Things are only really probably built. Most buildings are built with a lifespan in mind. Nothing's really designed to stand the test of time. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but it definitely seems.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad because like today, buildings are not designed and thought about as, this will be here forever. That's very, very new. In non-nomadic architecture, lots of nomadic architecture that's like, we'll be here just for a few months. But the building, where I live in a 110-year-old row home in Philly. And these row homes, some of them are 300, 400 years old. There are a few that are that old. So it's like, and they're made out of brick. If you want to keep this building up, you can for an indefinite amount of time. And so I think that's actually a big part of it. And a lot of them are ornamented. You don't ornament something that you think is going to be gone in like 10 years. And a lot of buildings that are built right now in Philly are like, they have there's like 10 years, they start breaking down. And like at best, you'll maybe get like 30 years out of them. Or that's like the best case scenario that some people will claim that their building is going to last 30 years. But anyway, I don't know why I got more into that, but it is, what I think is interesting is that, and I've thought about this like around Philly, is that the ornamentation signifies a lot. And it's only a little bit, it's just on like the cornice usually, or around the windows, but it signifies care. Like it signifies that I care about this place. I've put in this amount of work into it, and it's going to be mine, or it's going to be this family's for an indefinite amount of time. And I think that's something that's really beautiful. But I also just wanted to go back to what you said about the spirituality in that can come through ornament. And Islamic, I'm so glad you brought it up, because I was talking about Jewish ornament, and I was like, I gotta talk about Islamic ornament also, because It's something I don't have at all a good grasp on, but love to try to read about sometimes. Which is that all of these tiny details, those geometric details, the different shapes, they mean different things. Like they're
Mm,
about oneness in the universe, or they're about the multifaceted level of layers of the universe, the multifaceted nature of the universe. They talk about like the sky and the water. There's all of these different things that are, and people, people disagree on what means what. Um, but my partner Ben, I thought he said this in, like, I was looking this up on my phone because he said this in a really beautiful way, and he had the similar experience when he went to the. I have not been to the Alhambra, but I'm
oh
dying to
my
go
God.
because
Next
because
level.
I
Next
know
level.
because he was like he's talked about it many times, and he's like, or we just started talking about it more often though, where he's like, yeah, I went in and I had this like spiritual experience, and I'm not
Mm,
Muslim, but it's just like, and what he felt was that this ornament, what he said is like, it makes apparent the ornament makes apparent the complexity and unknowable elements of our world, things that are beyond our comprehension. Which I thought
mm.
was so cool. I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
lovely.
I've been like trying to put this into words, but he said it so well, where it was just like, you can say things through ornamentation. And this is abstraction, just in general. Like you can say things through abstraction that you can't through a literal figurative image. But ornamentation can do different things than just abstraction on its own. When you repeat something a lot, many times, you start to think, you start to meditate on it. You start to meditate on deeper levels of, and so what goes into a symbol that a culture has held on to for hundreds of years to mean a certain thing. That takes so much. You can imagine all of the people making that same signal, making that same symbol and thinking about it, maybe in evolving ways. And I think that's just so much fun to think about,
Mm.
in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see echoes of this kind of premise throughout the art world at all? Because I've, studying art, and it has changed a little bit, but I definitely remember at
Yeah.
university, that there was, no, it's still the case, I think. But there
Mhm.
definitely seems to be a hierarchy between high art, meaning fine art, and more low art, maybe being more to do with like craft or things like that, or ornaments or
Yeah.
decorative. I do think that has definitely changed a bit, but I do remember in, probably when I was at university in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, it was, yeah, it definitely seemed like craft was kind of um, not high art, it was
Mhm.
there was a bit of an aversion to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I it does feel, art, you cover art all the time. You go to a lot of the leading contemporary art museum events and cover them. It does seem that there is somewhat, uh, not strictly at all, but an aversion to highly skilled craftsmanship in the contemporary art world. And that's
Mhm.
not just bitter me being a semi-realist painter, but it does seem like there is an aversion
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
high skill. And again, not strictly speaking, there are plenty of
Mhm.
incredible realist contemporary artists, sculptors, all sorts of stuff. And
Yeah.
realism is not the benchmark of what makes good art by no
Mhm.
means, of course.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was wondering whether you see any echoes of that kind of thinking or that whole premise in the art world.
Yeah, definitely. I do also, I agree with you that I think it's changing,
Hmm.
which is really interesting. So it's exciting to be getting into this at a moment that I think it's changing, where you just see a lot more. And I think a large part of it is that we're in a post 2020 era, where there was this huge push for civil rights, during that time. And I think at the end of the day, it's a benefit that we get to see artists from different cultures, from different backgrounds, that we have, that are non-white artists, all of these different, a much more diverse palette. You could even say of a, excuse me, let me try this again. Hold on. Hold on. I'm so sorry.
Don't be.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing more ornamentation today and more craft. I think people are starting to be more aware of all the possibilities within that. But I think it's still, you know, it's still pretty far behind where it should be. I think we're still seeing a lot of not as much appreciation as there should be for the applied arts. I feel like we keep kind of pretend. I almost feel like the art world like keeps pretending like this is something that's been solved. It's like, oh yeah, we used to see, you know, where this exhibition is going to collapse the fields of art and craft, and there's, you know, there's not going to be any division anymore, and there's still such a huge division. It's, you know, I definitely talk with folks that I was talking with an artist that when she was going, you know, it was much worse like 40 years ago, for example, like who, you know, people would talk, you know, you were, there's so many second wave feminist artists because they were the ones that really bore the brunt of this.
Right. Right.
That, you know, your work is too feminine. It's too, nobody wants to see needles, you know, needlepoint. Nobody wants to see embroidery. I don't know, like it's too frilly, you know, it's too illustrative, of course, you know, like, oh, this isn't a comic book class, this is art or whatever. And you know, it's, they were starting to, what's really cool is that like this artist, so like one artist I'm listening to an interview with, I was just listening to an interview with is Joyce Kozloff, who was in the pattern and decoration movement in the 70s and 80s. And they were thinking about all this stuff in such a scholarly and serious way. And I think it's actually from what I've seen, the Heresies text, they published a journal called Heresies, and she wrote this text with somebody else that wasn't quite a manifesto. It was kind of this overview of how ornament has been looked at in Western art and architecture for the last couple hundred years. And it is the most incisive and actually studied an overview of this that I have seen. And they talk about race and class and capitalism and all of these different things, just way before people were having these conversations in a serious way, I think. And so, you know, this was also coming right out of the era where is the height of especially minimalism and like anti-craft, like male architecture. And the paper that is this incredible paper, a little hard to read, but like this amazing essay by Anna, I don't really know how to pronounce her last name, Chave or Chave, I'm not sure, Anna Chave, who wrote an essay called Minimalism and Power. And she talks about, you know, Donald Judd, Carl Andre, these guys who were notorious for being assholes most of the time, but also were really like to kind of show off about the fact that they didn't even touch their art. You know, that the point of the art piece was I can call up my guy and he can make me like a 1-ton bronze cube, and I just put it on the phone. That's all I do. And that's like applauded.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not gonna say no interesting art came out of that. There's some definitely interesting art, and there's cool parts about it, but and there's cool pieces that come out of it, but it's this extremely male, and the way she just goes into beautifully how kind of there's the toxic masculinity aspect of it, and also how, you know, and they even say as much as I want you to walk in the room and feel overpowered, and like that I am kind of exerting dominance on you with my art. And that is a large, and there's a huge, I think, a lot to do with architecture in these pieces. I mean, like Tilted Arc was like one of like the big kind of watershed moment for this type of art, and also because it was this huge, you know, quote unquote public art. It was public art structure that just cut across this park in New York and just totally disrupted pedestrians and like how they walked to work every day. And people fucking hated it. Like people were like pissing on it and like graffitiing it and all these things. And the way the museum responded, it was very much like, well, you just don't get it. Like,
Yeah,
why
yeah.
don't you like this? You must not
Mm.
understand. And they're like, no, I understand. I just don't like it. It's in my way. I'm trying to walk here. Um, and um, and so that I think that's like one of the more pointed ways that like this was in dialogue with architecture, with public space, and how and the level of respect that these big decision makers in architecture firms, for example, or city designers and planners and all of the clients that they have, the level of respect that they have for an everyday pedestrian walking around the street. Um, Another long-winded answer to your question.
No, love it.
I think about this so much, but I do think that we're at a moment where folk art, ornamented art, queer art, feminized art, feminine art, art from non-white people, from people who are not white, all of these things, is, but more than anything, I think I just mean like folk art and ornamented art, are things that represent people's ethnic backgrounds also is coming into the light more. And it's exciting to see that. Sometimes I do criticize museums for kind of using people's art as a way to kind of shield themselves from criticism.
Mm.
That's a whole other discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God, there's just so much, so much to talk
No,
about.
there's so much to talk about. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. You keep asking these wonderful
No, no,
questions
no.
that I'm like, oh no, I think about this all day. What do I
I will shift gears a little bit, and
Yeah.
a lot of so a lot of some of the other kind of content that you've been covering through Hyperallergic, you've really been making a big effort to cover the recent censorship in the art world, particularly surrounding the modern, the current conflict in, between Israel and Palestine. It seems that it's had crazy amounts of waves in the art world, in Melbourne and Australia as well. I mean, there's
Mm,
countless, there's been lots of examples here of artists who have been with galleries for decades being dropped, a lot of acts of protests. I mean, firings, resignations, artwork
mm,
removals, artists being dropped by
mm.
galleries, event cancellations, boycotts, vandalism, and destruction of artworks as well. There's been,
Yeah.
it's been
Wow.
very much had a lot of ripples in the art world.
Hmm.
Yeah, how do you see this? What is the importance of this conflict in relation to the art world? Why is this? Why are the ripples
Mm,
so huge?
mm. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I mean, it is such a tragic thing that we're seeing. It is such an
Yeah.
awful thing. And definitely scary, I think, for a lot of people. Um, I think what's wild is that, just like first thing comes to mind, honestly, is just how wild it is that this is happening in so many institutions that claim that they are embracing that claim that they are embracing diversity. This is exactly, what I was thinking about a couple seconds ago and saying, museums are diversifying the people that they hire, and the artists that they feature, and making all of these grand statements about inclusion and diversity, and then will silence people in the same breath,
Right.
for just asking questions, even, or trying to show art that's even tangentially related to Palestine. Um, a lot of people why is this so? I mean, why is it so important to the art world? Well, one thing is that, of course, it's important to the artists. So most artists, across the board, artists tend to be, when you, I think, just like when you think as an artist, you think in a more critical way than the average person about injustices in the world. So you often, I do think, see most artists kind of standing up for these things. So it's not surprising that we're seeing this is just very important to so many artists. And so a lot of artists want to make art about it. And then what happens is you have large companies who own certain art galleries or have money invested in art are saying are are pulling their funding or discouraging people from these things. And I think a lot of it is about money. A
Yeah,
lot of it is
definitely.
about people that are invested in Israel. So you have major board members of these major museums um, who are invested in weapons manufacturers. And so that's something that you could see at, the Museum of Modern Art. A lot of famously for a long time, they've had a lot of entanglements like that. And so, it's the board members and it's the funders, who don't want to um, be, they support Israel and they see this as a major threat to them and to their finances and to their investments. And so, yeah, it's interesting. The things that we've seen are just so insane. I mean, there's also museums that I think are afraid to make controversy. They're afraid to start conversations or tough conversations. And mainly because, they're afraid of their funding being pulled. And of course, it looks different that looks different in the US than it does in Germany, than it does in England. It all works in slightly different ways. In Germany, I find it even definitely more frightening because that funding is coming from the government. And that's just the government is just, kind of blanket deciding what is acceptable and what's not and applying laws to that and then pulling funding that people to rely on, which is crazy. But yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, there's some things that we've seen that are just so it really does. It just still boggles my mind. We've spent so much time with it. It still boggles my mind that the Frick Museum in Pittsburgh delayed a show of Islamic art, not even
Right.
Palestinian art, just
Not, yeah,
Islamic art.
not even to
I
do
mean,
with,
like
yeah,
it's
Palestine.
crazy. And I think a lot of it too is people again, like, being afraid, to have those tough conversations. And so and I think part of that almost it's like this ironic thing where part of that also comes out of kind of like the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement where they're just afraid of backlash. So then they start panicking and just making the most wild decisions possible. I mean, history is definitely not going to look kindly, I think, on this. I think people, and I think, it's already people are becoming really disillusioned in a lot of ways. But it's yeah, I don't know. There's like so much. I hope did that answer a question a little
Yeah,
bit?
yeah.
I
I
hope so.
mean,
Okay. I'm trying to pick what like there's yeah, it's enormous. I mean, there's like it's happened so much that I feel like a few people, me and then some other people have tried to keep lists of how many people have been censored
mm,
for saying the most like straightforward things like I don't like bombs being thrown indiscriminately and killing this many children. Like this should
yeah.
be a straightforward full stop thing. And
Mm.
your art show is pulled or your funding is pulled. That is, I mean, yeah, you every day we learn more information and it just still continues to boggle my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does seem like a big divide between the creative and the institution or the
Mm-hmm.
collectors and the galleries, and yeah, really, I think you're completely right. It does all come down to money. It's funny how it doesn't seem like very long ago that controversial art was kind of maybe even sought after. A bit of controversy might really
Mm-hmm.
get the eyes and ears on this project or whatever.
Mm.
But when it's come down to this particular conflict slash issue, it's yeah, the aversion. Exactly like you were saying before, a lot of institutions will use this newfound appreciation for for cultural ornamentation to kind of hide the bad stuff. And
Yeah.
on one hand, it is great that, you know, a lot of progress is being made, but on the other hand, it's like, you know, let's not fool ourselves. It's so much of it's about
Yeah.
money, right? It's about,
Yeah.
you can be as
Yeah.
controversial as you want, but as soon as anything you say affects the funding, yeah, we'll cut your head off. That's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, 100%. Yeah.
Bad
And
terminology there, but
it's no,
but,
no, no. And I think you know, one of the scary things is that one of the scary and difficult, you know, one of the more difficult kind of nuts to crack open here, I think, is that especially, you know, when it comes to big institutions with museums, there's so much injustice that so many of them are, you know, are allowing and enforcing so much art that's stolen, so much labor that's exploited. I mean, like there's so many things. And what's really frustrating, I think, is that you see people learn a little bit of information and then kind of jump to even like conspiracy theories too. That's like, you know, oh, everything in museums is stolen or everything in museums is fake. And you know, there's so many amazing smaller museums or so many, you know, even so, like go on a free day for a museum. Don't give them your money. Just go if it's a museum you disagree with, for example. Um, because you know, and then so what ends up happening, I think, is that like, you know, sometimes, you know, it's scary, and Israel is at fault for this. But people will kind of jump to the conclusion too that, like, you know, like Hollywood, like, oh, it's because Jews control these museums and that's why this is happening. And I mean, what's, you know, there are, I'd say, I don't know if this is actually true, but it's like, yes, there are a lot of Jewish people that are associated with the arts, like in many ways. And that come out of New York, for example, like my family. But there are just as many Jews that are on the other side of this, that are the artists that are fighting to overturn this, literally just as many. And so you have, we're at the point where in the US, about 50% of Jews are demanding a ceasefire, or are calling for a ceasefire. We are not a fringe group. Like we will be talked about as a fringe group by people like the ADL. You know, when you get to Germany, this is one statistic I just keep liking to repeat again and again, but um, the of the people that have been labeled anti-Semites for trying to speak out against Palestine, excuse me, speak out against Israel or for a free Palestine. This comes from a podcast, or from somebody who's also been tracking all of these incidents in Germany. What this group found was that 90% of the group that the 90% of the people that have been labeled as anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel are racialized people. And then because in Germany, Jews are definitely racialized, that's within that group. Of that group, around 30% are Jewish. So, and if you compare that to I think it's like 0.3% of Israel's population is Jewish. Almost 30% of the people that are being labeled as anti-Semitic or canceled or censored for fighting for a free Palestine are Jewish as well in Germany. That's something that is and then, you know, it is an anti-Semitic thing that Germany is putting that in an anti-Semitic movement that is currently happening in Germany of Zionists who want to silence you know, us, you know, anti-Zionist Jews.
Yeah, it must be very difficult being a Jewish person speaking up against Israel and its treatment. I mean, I can only imagine that the vision that you know, drives wedges within the community, and it's not a subject that people don't really have an opinion on, particularly if it's close, much more, you know, if it's close to you. What has your experience been like speaking out against, yeah, I guess largely the censorship, but also just being in disagreement with the way Israel is handling this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, within the Jewish community, it's been such a painful thing. I think, and I think mainly, my experience is, seeing all of these organizations that we thought, many of us thought would have been on our side or with us on this, kind of turning their backs on us, or turning their backs on people. That's been a really tragic thing to see. I have what I almost consider like a point of privilege, which is that I did not grow up in a Zionist household. I didn't grow up in a Zionist synagogue. I don't that was not something that was really enforced in my life, like in my family. A lot of other most other people, sadly, don't have that experience and are just kind of grown up where this is just the assumption that Israel is our rightful homeland. And so that is what there's stories from people that like will go with their school group to Israel. And I was talking, one of my friends made a video on TikTok about how they went on this trip and they were essentially terrorized by IDF soldiers, like pretending like they were being who basically lied to them and pretended like they were being hunted, like by a Palestinian militia, and like pretended like there was this whole like scenario, like stuff like that, where it's like you kind of like people are traumatized in a lot of ways, and our trauma is used, to enforce this idea, and our continued, the continued danger to our lives in many ways is used, or the threat of the danger to our lives is used as a justification for so many things that are happening. And it's really tragic because, I like almost like consider myself lucky because in a way where it's like I did not have a lot of like close connections that were angry with me about this. It's been heartening to kind of connect with a lot of other fellow Jews who feel like the same way that I do. But I know that has not been the experience for probably most people. I mean, most of us are more on the younger side. I've talked to a lot of people who have had really, really difficult conversations with their family members. And so part of what I'm trying to do, and because there's so many different ways you can go about talking about this issue. But one of the things I've been trying to do mostly is to try to kind of break apart certain things about Judaism itself and say this is not inherently, Judaism and Zionism can be separated, or at least, there's different ways of defining Zionism, by which I mean like political Zionism, that we are going to force this thing to happen in Israel. I think these things can be separated. And so what I'm trying to do, and then on other levels, trying to like break apart certain things that are big, kind of, that are really hard for people to talk about. So things like Hamas being funded by, or Hamas, the growth of Hamas being very much pointedly allowed by the Israeli government up until the year 2019, at least. Things like that, that are kind of, have helped me understand all of this, and I hope can help more people understand it and have conversations with people. So like, it's tough. I think the most difficult thing I have to deal with is comments I have, or, people don't, I'm in a lucky situation, I think, where I'm happy I'm in a situation at this point in time where, I get to work for folks, work with folks that have, that are also seeing this critically. So that's, that is really good. Yeah, I don't know. There's still so many it's been a difficult time, you know. I think there's just so much for there's so much for people to unravel and unlearn. And you know, I think there's a lot of grieving that that still just hasn't been done. And it feels like almost like there's no, like, it's hard to know when to do it or how to do it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think so. Yeah, I've sort of learned to sort of brush off people that I think at the beginning it was a lot more people that are, you know, for us, for Jewish creators or your storytellers, what have you, writers that are kind of harangued by Jewish folks that are more Zionist. You know, one of the, you know, will be called kind of there's certain names that were called like capo or like self-hating Jew or like all of these things. Um, and I have seen that dramatically go down, I think, since October 7th. I think if you are still at this point going to be, there's fewer and fewer people and I think it's going to keep going down where fewer people can continue to justify what's happening because yeah, you have to be pretty, you have to have a pretty hard heart to continue to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So you do think support from within the community is dropping from at least
Of
in
Israel?
America, or yeah,
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm,
definitely.
mm.
Definitely. I think I mean, we've seen it. It's been, there's something about it that's, it's exciting to see, but we know it's also a very painful thing for a lot of people, which is why
Yeah.
it's wild. It's a wild thing. But, yeah, no, I mean, the ADL we've seen them start to freak out more and more. People like the ADL or, you know, other organizations like that,
Who
who
are the ADL,
equate,
sorry?
who the ADL is the Anti-Defamation League,
Right,
in the
right.
US. So they, they've done a lot of helpful things in the past, but one of their less helpful things that they do is equate anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So which is, you know, a very big source of so much discontent. So they will, we've seen them start to get antsy. I think we're starting, this is like a way that my couple of my fellow anti-Zionist Jews were talking on Instagram about like, yeah, there's like, they are starting to make statements where they know that their support is dropping. It's dropping. And yeah, we've definitely started to see it go down. I think, yeah, the latest statistics again being like 50% of us are wanting a ceasefire. And yeah, that's been on a steady increase. Um, and I think there is a big generational divide. There are, sadly, like I wish it was across generations, but it, you know, it is something that there are, I think, a lot of younger people who are becoming more and more critical of what's going on. I think it's going to continue going that way because there has been also, you know, some really incredible writers and people that have sort of started coming out and talking about this. Um, like, you know, Writers for Jewish Currents. Jewish Currents is an incredible magazine, that you know, pretty explicitly just is about Jewishness, Jewish topics from a leftist perspective, but they're incredibly well researched and well studied and present the facts, in a way that I think is really digestible and really cool. Um, and they've been a really strong voice, I think, in a lot of this. Jewish Voices for Peace is another that have, I've had disagreements with some ways that they've handled some things in the past, but it's exciting to see the things that they're doing. And then there's other groups. I'm I'm the biggest fan of If Not Now, which is a group that does not explicitly call itself anti-Zionist, specifically because I think it's a tactic to create a space to talk, to discuss with people that are just not quite on board yet, which I think is so important that we have compassion and just grace and understanding when we're having these conversations. And so obviously that's made really difficult online. But yeah, I'm excited to there. I think at the end of the day, there's so much tragedy happening right now, but I do think that is one source of hope that I have is seeing more and more of the Jewish community kind of coming together over this. And there have been, I think, a lot of strong ties with people I've met that I didn't know before all of this, more artists and other creators that were kind of like, yeah, you're here too. Let's do it. And I was just talking to an artist where he's like, yeah, it's an enormous difference to where we were like, 20 years ago. She was in joining protests against the apartheid wall, or excuse me, they were joining protests against the apartheid wall in like 2002, 2003, and there was like a handful of them there, of Jewish folks among that group, and they've just been amazed by just how much it's changed over the last 20 years. There's been an enormous shift, and yeah, I think it's a good thing. What sucks is that it's the largest group of people in the US or in the world that supports Israel is not Jews, it's evangelical Christians.
Right.
And so it's really just, it's up to them really in a lot of ways to kind of turn the ship around, in my opinion.
It's for a pretty sinister reason too, isn't it? It's like,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it because the evangelicals have this idea that the end days are coming and what basically they'll be basically wiping out of so
yeah, many do. Yeah, it's, trying to bring on the end times, because we have, Jews have to go back to Israel for that to happen and stuff like that.
right.
Yeah,
That's
many do. Yeah, it's super scary and creepy. I mean, like John
crazy.
Hagee, who was he's crazy. John Hagee is like a good example of a classic anti-Semitic Zionist, and he's like the head of, I forget what the organization's called, but it's like the biggest Zionist organization in the US, that's a Christian organization, and he believes that, like, he just believes crazy things about Jews. Like, he's really anti-Semitic, and he's kind of held up as this like great hero and friend of Israel, which is just, yeah, it's crazy to me. There's so much anti-Semitism within Zionism, and it's since the beginning, really, in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go you on your bravery of, constantly covering this stuff. It is a lot of a lot of big things have happened. A lot of, protests in exhibitions, hundreds of
Yeah.
people's walking out of the Met and 500
yeah.
people or so protesting at
Oof.
MoMA. Big things, big
Yeah.
disruptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so well done you on, I don't know, being courageous and covering this. Yeah, thought I'd just finish with a lighthearted throwaway question.
Sounds good.
Activists soup throwing on priceless artworks. Does the means justify the cause? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Unpopular opinion. Well, popular opinion for some, unpopular opinion for others. I'm generally anti this type of
I hate
action.
it.
I'm
I hate
generally
it
not
so much.
about
Fuck these
it.
people.
Yeah.
Leave art alone, you dicks. I
I
agree
think
with so
it's,
many of their things. I'm like, you're ruining
yeah.
everything. You're not
Oh,
helping a cause.
oh my gosh. And like,
So with you.
they're really not. They're really not. And it's like, we have data to show it. And like,
Yeah.
if the data said something else, I'd be like, oh, cool. But no, like, we have evidence to see that, but it's part of, my friend was working on a report at UPenn. I forget which the department is, but basically that showed that people were less likely to support the climate movement after learning about or talking about these protests. And it's like, of course. And one of the most frustrating parts about it is that it doesn't matter to the respondents. I'm not saying the respondents are right. Like, it's, everyone should support the movement to stop climate change, but one of the crazy things about how this report came out is it didn't matter if to the respondents if the art was actually damaged or not. So like if which I think is so weird. So the whole point of like so many of these protests, which makes it, I think, doubly, I don't want to say kind of silly, stupid,
Moronic.
more dumb,
Yeah.
is that like, yeah, okay, we throw tomato sauce on the painting that has a glass cover. So you're gonna clean the glass, it'll come off. What I like was that protester at, or what was that protester at? But I would of course never encourage FBI or CIA. I would of course never encourage this type of behavior.
Big
Going,
FBI CIA listenership here, by
yeah,
the way.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
or whoever, of course, would never do that. But went to a painting of Balfour, of Lord Balfour in England, and pour into it and
Right.
spray
Yeah.
painted
Literally
onto it.
destroyed it.
I
Yeah.
literally destroyed the painting.
Mm.
I was like, that is a much better protest. It's a much more effective protest. And they had a very clear point to go along with that protest. That was a clear connection to something that was happening in Palestine, or in world events. The worst part of a lot of these the tomato soup type protests is that I just call them tomato soup protests because that's of course the iconic tomato soup Van Gogh kicked it all off.
All
But
right. Yep.
what bothers me is that it pits that movement against art, or the way it and then or the way it's going to naturally be perceived is that it pits social justice, or the green movement against art, when we should be, in my opinion, using art to our advantage, or using art to make a statement. And we've seen that with so many amazing activists who've been doing that all around the world. I mean, I think what's annoying to me about it the most is like, my whole life is devoted to thinking about how we can use art for social change. And this type of protest is such like a shallow understanding of how art and world power like interact. Like it's just not how it works. And why they keep doing it?
They're still
There's like
going.
they're
They're
still
still
going.
going.
They're still they're still they're I forget what the last one was, but they all sound exactly the same. And that's another I could keep going about and about problems with this, but yeah, it's is it the worst thing that's happening in the world right now? No. Do I find it irritating, and I wish that they would rethink some of their actions so that the anti-climate change movement, the green movement, could get some more support? Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. Total in agreement with you there. Well, Isabella,
I'm glad. I'm glad.
thank you so much for coming on and
Of
chatting.
course. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, really love the work that you're doing.
Thanks so
And
much.
yeah, thanks for a great conversation.
Oh, of course, of course. I'm very, very, very glad to be here.
Of course. What's the best way for people to find you and keep up to date with
Yes.
the things you're doing and just the content that you're putting out?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can follow me at Interstellar Isabella on Instagram, is where most of the things happen. I'm also on TikTok, and on YouTube, I'm Ornament and Crime, partially out of revenge to Adolf Loos. So you can find me there. But you can also see me on the hyperallergic page. And yeah, just find my work is around hyperallergic, so you can just see us there. And you can also see the podcast, the hyperallergic podcast. Check it out.
Yeah. Are you a host of
Yeah.
that at all, or are you just
I
working
am
on it?
not a host. No, I am producing it. And
Great.
I'll be on a couple upcoming episodes. But I'll like, we brainstorm, we have ideas, who's going to come on,
Yeah.
I edit it. I don't know, all the things that one has to do, as many steps to put out a podcast episode.
Mm.
takes a lot of work.
For
But
sure.
yeah, that's anyway, sorry, you can cut that part. I rambled a little bit.
No, not at all.
But yeah, I'll be on a couple upcoming episodes at some point. But right now I am scheming behind the scenes.
Wonderful. Well, can't wait to listen. So, yeah, thank you so
Awesome.
much again. And thank you,
Of course.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
listening,
Hope you have a
guys.
great day.
Oh, you too. Have a great night.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Have a good one.
Awesome. Bye.